So one of the things that Dwayne in the front row here likes to tease me about is my we gotta list. So wherever we're pulling out of the driveway and I am having a moment to survey the house as we're leaving, all of a sudden through my mind will go all of these things that we gotta do. We gotta this, we gotta that, we gotta remember this, we gotta get to that. How many of you have an we gotta list? Really, it's a he gotta list, if I was being totally honest, right? And that's on a small scale. I think that we all have, running from I gottas, little things we think we need to adjust and change in the circumstances of our lives, all the way to I wannas, big things that we want to change or adjust somehow in our lives. And before we get into the nuts and bolts of tonight's topic, I'd like you to take one moment, without being too enlightened about it, to think about one of your I wannas. I want to change my life in this way. I want to lose 20 pounds. I want to find the one. I want to get a bigger house, whatever it might be. So take one moment to think about that and then confide in the person next to you about what that is. We're going to do an exercise around this later. Sounds like some of you are coming up with many. So I would be shocked and surprised if you couldn't come up with a whole bunch of I gottas and I wannas, really, honestly, if you were to be, look inside of yourself. Because we have such a weird way of looking at life in this culture. We think of it as some kind of game that we have to win. Right? And it actually, the very mindset of I gotta, I wanna, is what prevents us from having the things that we want in our lives. It doesn't actually get us the things, it prevents us from having the experience that we want. In the spring of 2008, I was running half marathons, and I had decided that I wanted to run a half marathon and beat my best ever time, which was 2 hours, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds. Imagine getting in at 2 hours, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds. If you are a runner, how many of you run in this audience? Do you have any idea how frustrating that is? Because if I got in at 1:59, I could say I did it in under 2 hours. So I decided this was going to be my goal, and I trained for this thing, and I prepared for this thing, and the night before the half marathon was to take place, I started feeling a little tickle in the back of my throat. But I am going to get in under 2 hours. I did this with a group of people. One was a really good friend of mine whose name was Laura. So we start out, it rained all night long that night, but as soon as we got to the starting line, the sun came out and it was beautiful, and I took this as a cosmic sign, and I abandoned my jacket at the starting line, and then off we go, and the clouds come back, and it starts to rain, and it starts to pour. And it is soaking wet. This is a picture from the actual race. So about an hour in, I am now cold and wet, but I am determined that I am going to get in under 2 hours. I have got my head down. I am driven. I am going to do it. I know what my goal is. I am going to do it. But I can feel how cold I'm getting and how miserable I'm getting. And then it starts to hail. there are big chunks of ice coming down out of the sky. Hail, not small hail either, big hail. So now I am soaking wet and there is ice coming down on top of me. But no, I am still determined. And eventually, as it gets closer and closer to 2 hours and I am nowhere near the finish line, I realize it is not going to happen. So I cross the finish line in a state of misery. I plod across, feeling horrible. And my friend is coming in behind me. A good 15, 20 minutes later, she comes in behind me. Here she is. She comes across the finish line like this. She ran through the hail. She ran through the rain. She had exactly the same life circumstances as I did. And she had a completely, totally different experience. And that, to me, I think is so important to realize. I mean, the metaphor of that, I think, is perfect. Because we would all like to be able to have that experience, even though we're running through our metaphorical hail and rain and all the difficult circumstances of our lives, right? The question is, how do we do that? So, ultimately, it requires the ability to fall in love with our life experience in its entirety, instead of only looking for these little moments that we're measuring as being the value and the worth of our lives, right? The happy moments, the good moments. We have to be able to fall in love with our own life experience totally across the board. And the irony in all of this is, like, if you think about your number one I wanted that you just came up with, how do you imagine you would feel if you got that thing? How do you imagine? Great, right? You imagine you're going to feel fabulous. So if you say to yourself, I just would like to have Halle Berry's body. Either I would like to have it be mine, or I want to have it sleeping next to me, right? One or the other. There she is. Now, in all honesty, I don't think she really has Halle Berry's body either in that picture, but if such a thing were to occur, right, and you actually get it from the perspective of your body right here, right now, looking at that, how do you feel? Honestly, don't you end up feeling not so great? Because you are looking out through the lenses of what you don't have, right? And you end up feeling crappy. And we don't tune into this, but this is how it works. You can't feel anything but bad when you're looking at your life through what you believe isn't there, through these kind of lenses of lack. And we are cuckoo in this culture. We buy into the promise that if we had all of this stuff, right, that car, that house, if we had all of this stuff, we say, oh, I would feel so much better if I had that. We think we need this perfect picture in order to be okay. But that quest for perfecting means that we also have to perform. And this performing, perfecting thing that we start getting driven by creates a whole lot of misery. And it's insidious. We don't realize how much we start to attach our happiness to things or to having our circumstances be different somehow than what they actually are. And this, particularly in terms of materialistic stuff, we are the wealthiest culture ever to exist in the history of humankind. We are the most abundant, we are the most privileged, we have the most healthcare, we have the most education. We have all of this stuff. And we are also the most in debt, the most obese, the most over-medicated, the most addicted. and the most depressed. We have the highest suicide rates. In the richest countries have the highest suicide rates. Like this is not happiness. Certainly a certain degree of material abundance is necessary for our survival, but there's something else going on that we need to address in order to actually live happy, fulfilled lives. So Robert Holden said, "Beware of destination addiction, a preoccupation with the idea that happiness is in the next place, the next job, and with the next partner. Until you give up the idea that happiness is somewhere else, it will never be where you are." So what actually prevents us from being happy? We have lots of crazy ideas about what prevents us from being happy, and most often we go on a bit of a quest to blame him or her, this or that, for our lack of happiness. Something outside of ourselves. If only he would be different, or she would be different, or this would be different, or that would be different. Some of us refuse to be happy until everything is just right in our lives. This is the one that I would tend to fall into, being a recovering perfectionist and a recovering control freak, both. Some of us are unhappy because we want to be happy all the time, which is kind of like a teeter-totter that goes up and never comes down. It's not possible. Some of us are unhappy because we want others to make us happy, and that one falls particularly heavily on the burden of people who are closest to us, our partners and our kids. And some of us think that we can kind of coerce happiness from the universe by applying some kind of magic formula. And understand, I'm not being critical about that. I'm pointing out the illogic. If these things actually worked, think of what you would have to do to get there. It's an illogical formula around how we can actually be happy in our lives. And I know for myself, if by some miracle occurred and I actually got all my I gottas and I wantas, right? Poof, there they are. My head would go to what if? Okay, it's all fine now, but what if there's an earthquake and the dam breaks, then the river comes flooding down and wipes out my whole house? What if? I know myself well enough. So we never turn around to really address the anxiety that is driving this whole thing. And that's where we got to go in order to reverse this crazy cycle that we can get into. Because finding what we want in the middle of what we've got requires putting a different context around our whole life. All of the circumstances of our lives, good and bad. So here's a question for you to consider. This is Michael Beckwith came up with this, and I think it's beautiful. He says, what if absolutely nothing in your life changed? What would you have to shift from within to attain a state of happiness, even if everything outside of you stayed exactly the same? So think about it. If your life froze in this moment, nothing is going to change. What would you have to shift in order to have a different experience of that? And falling in love with your own imperfect life and your own imperfect self is the answer to that question. Let go of perfecting and performing. Can you imagine what that would be like? To actually experience the beauty of your own life without having to change a thing, or without feeling like you needed to change a thing. And for anyone in the audience who's freaking out about goals and plans, this does not mean that you can't have goals and plans. Right? Laura and I both wanted to run a half marathon. We both planned to have a half marathon. We both trained to do a half marathon. We both did it in completely and totally different ways. She was in love with her whole experience as she was doing it. And I was just attached to my own sense of failure. And no wonder I was bloody miserable. So the question is, how do we do it? How do we change how we relate to our life circumstances? And I like to use little words so that you can remember. So we're going to talk about 4 things that spell the word real for your real life. I don't know why these things make me so happy, but they do. So, first one, responsibility. Particularly emotional responsibility. Because if we are ever going to achieve a lasting state of happiness, we've got to get out of victim consciousness and take responsibility for the state of our own existence, period, 100% entirely. To the extent that you attach your happiness to someone or something outside of yourself is also the extent to which you're giving away your power. So, if you think about it, wouldn't that be a relief? This means taking responsibility for your own life, but stopping there. Stopping there. Responsibility for you. A Course in Miracles says that every choice you make stems from what you think you are and brings results accordingly. So the life that we're living, all of us, is the one that we have participated in creating through the kind of choices that we've made. And so it is pointless to argue with it. This is where you are based on what you have put into it. And the first place to start taking responsibility is in terms of asking ourselves, where do we get the idea that we need something more than what we have in order to be okay? Where does that thing, I need something more, better, different, come from? We're on a mission, ultimately, to make up for an inner sense of lack. And all of us have what we call suspicions about ourselves, fears about ourselves. That maybe I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, I'm unlovable, I'm guilty. And these live kind of in the basement of our psyches on an emotional level. We might know better in our heads, but on an emotional level, we feel something about ourselves. And we're set up for this just based on how we develop as children. The very first part of us to get wired up when we're born is our emotional brain, because it facilitates bonding with our caregivers. So we are wired for connection before we're wired for anything. And to me, that has a spiritual reason for being, not just a biological survival-based one. And so whenever anything happens, particularly with the people who are important to us when we're young, it's literally terrifying. So for me, the theme that has played out throughout my life happened with my dad. He was gone a lot when I was growing up. He was really focused on his career, what he was doing out in the world. He would come home, he'd be stressed out, he'd lose his temper. And he would take phone calls from work in the middle of important family events. And eventually my mother started kind of getting in there to try and prevent some of these scenes from happening as well. I'd come home wanting to see my dad after he'd be gone, and my mom would say, "Now is not a good time." And for me, these moments were that kind of scary, traumatic moment, where all of a sudden I'm flooded with fear, as we all are, and we think, oh no, what have I done? There's something wrong with me. And they might be obvious, like being abused in some way. They might be more subtle, when some part of you isn't seen or heard or validated, where you're told, don't go to your room and don't come out until you can smile about it. All of these things, we start taking on suspicions about ourselves. We start believing who I am is not good enough. And in the very moment we take on those suspicions about ourselves in the basement of our psyches, we develop a strategy system to make up for that. So we think, oh no, who I am is not good enough to be loved. What do I have to do to get the love back? And we try behavior A, doesn't work. Behavior B doesn't work. Behavior C, it works. Bingo. Who I am is not good enough, I will become behavior C. In my case, I learned to really take care of the relationship before I took care of me. That's what I learned in my situation with my dad. I'd be able to read his face and know when is a good time to talk to him and when isn't. And so it's like we have now a whole bunch of strategies on the porch, but in the basement of our houses, we've got a whole bunch of fears about who we are, and they end up running the show. That's where that sense of inside lack comes from. So that is where we have got to start taking responsibility, ultimately, facing ourselves first, looking inside. Because regardless of the fact that other people have done things that have impacted you, you are the only one who can change that. So the question to ask is, what am I believing about myself that I think I need more than what I have in my life to be okay? Because we have to realize that anytime we're hoping, wishing, longing, what we're really saying to ourselves is, I'm not enough. I'm not enough. I'm not enough. And so that is why we're miserable. That's why we aren't happy. So that one leads right into our next factor, which is emotional vulnerability. The emotional part is kind of redundant, but I needed an E to spell my word. So, rather than understanding our fears, too often we hide from them and just kind of hope they're going to go away, right? Like an ostrich sticking its head in the sand. I don't want to feel that uncomfortable feeling. I don't want to look at it, so I'm just going to pretend it's not there. Doesn't work so well. And those emotions, those fears, those anxieties, those uncomfortable feelings, they have so much power. And they have power to teach us and power to transform our lives if we're actually willing to start listening to them and allowing them instead of just kind of being pushed around by them. So bottom line is this means we have to start by feeling our feelings instead of doing all this crazy stuff that we do to try to not feel. And what we don't realize when we're busy trying to not feel is that when you try and numb yourself, you numb yourself entirely. You can't selectively numb your life experience. You can't do it. You can't say, I don't want to feel sad. I don't want to feel angry ever. I don't want to feel scared ever, but I do want to feel joyful, and I do want to feel happy, and I do want to feel alive. You can't do that. Because all of those feelings use exactly the same network in our body. Anger, passion, sadness, joy, fear, excitement. They use the same network. So when you try to cut off your feeling, you are cutting yourself off from all the good stuff as well. So we have to let ourselves feel those feelings, in a way get in touch with what's going on in our basement, and then let ourselves be vulnerable where we are vulnerable. Actually, instead of hiding, pretending, defending, strategizing, using all our porch techniques that we learned, we have to actually let ourselves be vulnerable where we are vulnerable. Because the fears that we have are not true. But we're never going to realize that as long as we're hiding them away. Evolution takes place on the point of contact with another human being. If you think about how you feel when somebody is being brave enough to be vulnerable in front of you, how do you feel when someone's legitimately vulnerable with you? Sick. That's not the word. That's not the... Safe! I thought you said sick. It's not where I was going with that. Safe. And your heart opens, doesn't it? Your heart opens. That's a human response to vulnerability. And there is so much power in that. Vulnerability is connective. And that's why vulnerability is more likely to work than any of the strategies that we want to employ, any of the masks we put on, any of the controlling stuff that we do. Vulnerability invites connection. And the key is ultimately to reveal our vulnerability in a responsible way. Because I think in this culture we also will often confuse victim with vulnerability. And victim sends messages, look what you've done to me. You hurt me. And that I could spend a whole hour talking about, but I'm not going to. Next, acceptance. Stop arguing with your own life circumstances. How much time do you spend arguing about how things should be? Or upset because they are the way they are? Whatever is happening is what is happening, and it is a waste of energy to argue about it inside of yourself. It is a waste of energy. And practicing acceptance is the quickest way that you're going to get yourself unstuck when you feel stuck in your life. I guarantee it. Sometimes what's happening is hard. And when it's hard, the bravest thing we can do is let ourselves actually fall into that experience. And let ourselves feel it. And let ourselves move through it on an emotional level. I started my career more than 20 years ago at a cancer clinic. And people's responses to hearing the news that they or a loved one has been diagnosed with cancer is often, why me? Right? Which is a pretty understandable human response to that kind of scary news. Because when people hear cancer, they think, I'm dying, which is not true anymore. However, that's where our brains go. Cancer, death. Scary business, why me? A woman named Leslie was diagnosed with breast cancer when she was in her 30s, and she had 2 kids, and she had lost her husband a couple of years before. And when asked if she ever asked that question, why me? She said, at first I did, and then I figured, why not me? Why not me? This is the role that I've been given to play, and I'm going to do it as gracefully and as consciously as I possibly can. The best stories are not stories that say, once upon a time they lived happily ever after. The best stories, the best feature films have challenges, have difficulties, have all kinds of messy human things in the middle of them. And that, to be able to fall in love with your own story means learning how to see the beauty even in the middle of really hard, challenging circumstances. And this one is really hitting home for me these days. Dwayne and I are both surrounded by people who have got some really serious challenges happening in their lives right now. Relationships breaking up, affairs coming to light, a couple of people actually dying at the moment, one who's a very close friend of ours in Sweden. And that, when we think about life as a game that we have to win, like if the object of the game is not to face the same difficulties that our neighbors are facing, we're never going to be able to find happiness. We're always going to be in a state of anxiety. Every single one of us are going to go through difficulty at some point in our lives. These things are predictable, not necessarily about when, but for sure somebody close to you is going to die. You're going to go through challenges. You're going to go through difficulties. And when we can actually connect to our stories in a different way, we can experience the beauty even in the middle of those challenges. This is a beautiful quote from Carl Rogers, who says, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change." So just as our lives are a mixed bag, so are we. We are all a mix of strength and weakness and vulnerability and talent. None of us is perfect. And just as we physically look differently on an emotional, psychological level, it's like we all have a different thumbprint. We're not all meant to be perfect little pictures that we're trying to be so hard. And there's beauty in that mixed bag. When the Navajo weave a blanket, they deliberately weave a flaw into it. Deliberately. Because they believe that lets the spirit of the blanket roam. And I think that's a beautiful, gorgeous metaphor. Like there's something in these flaws and in these difficulties that's actually essential in terms of our spirit roaming, in terms of our growth and our development as human beings. If we actually manage to create our lives where there's never any difficulty and everything is always perfect, we would end up being narcissists. We'd be diagnosable, every single one of us. The thing that makes us rich and amazing as human beings is all of these flaws, apparent flaws. We're perfectly imperfect. And so when we're brave enough to reveal those flaws, to reveal our vulnerability, when we can accept, in a way, that's where we accept ourselves and we start to be able to change. Ultimately, that is the experience of the awakening. People come, not all of us know how to be vulnerable. If we have any skill as facilitators, it's in helping people to become vulnerable. But what happens when we actually get there is magic. Because vulnerability invites connection. And the experience of connection is the correction to those crazy things that we have made up about ourselves. Because every single one of those suspicions that we're holding about ourselves was born in a relationship with an important other person. None of them happened when you were all by yourself. Not a single one of them. They all happened with somebody. And we need to correct them with somebody as well. We can't do it by reading a book. You'll get great information by reading a book, don't get me wrong. But what will end up happening is then your head is going to be in an argument with your feelings all the time. You're going to be trying to talk yourself out of how you feel all day long. Because you know better up here, but you feel something else. So further to this, Rudyard Kipling said, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, then yours is the earth and everything in it. If we feel like we need to be protected from life's sorrows and from difficulties, we're never going to feel the happiness that comes from fully living our lives. Instead, we're going to be trying to negotiate our way through to avoid difficulty. And that does not equal happiness. If we are thinking about life as a game that we're going to win, if somehow we're going to manage to have less challenges than our neighbor does and get more goodies than they have, that does not mean happiness. That does not equal happiness. So the other choice is to acknowledge that every single one of us are going to have pain at some point in our lives. Just as we have, it's in our future as well. It's in our past, it's in our future. For many sitting in this room, it's probably also in your present. And when we start to kind of turn that around and say, okay, not why me, but why not me? When we can actually share that, we start to see that we as a human kind are far more the same than we are different. And in sharing our pain with another human being, there's a kind of beauty and a kind of happiness that comes from that. I know it sounds totally weird, but it is true. There's a kind of happiness that comes from that. And we experience the pain differently, in a way that's far different from suffering all by ourselves in silence. It allows us to move through it. Why not me? And so the key is to come to terms with all of our life experience, the past as well. Because if you can't look back at your past with love and appreciation, you are not going to be able to meet your present and your future with love and appreciation. Epictetus said, "We are disturbed not by what happens to us, but by our thoughts about what happens to us." So, all of these things that happened, it is not the events themselves that cause the suffering. It is the meaning that we have attached to the events and the meaning that we are now carrying into our future and projecting all over everything. It is not the events. It is the meaning that we have made of the events. So our task is to change the meaning, not just on an intellectual level, but on an emotional level. In a way to go down into that basement and do some serious redecorating down there. Because ultimately, all that stuff that we made up about ourselves there is not true. Whatever happened with my dad, it is absolutely 100% not true. What I made it mean, which is that I'm not important, that I'm unlovable, is not true. And in fact, I've had several conversations with my dad about all of that, and my dad didn't have a dad growing up. His dad was fighting the Second World War when he was growing up, and he didn't have a dad. For him, walking into that was like walking, in his world, there is a mother only, there is not a father. And so in his mind, it's really kind of bizarre, but he is seeing himself as unimportant walking into our family home. And in a way, that's part of how it landed on me, right? I also end up with that feeling I am not important. Because these suspicions that we're holding about ourselves end up being transmitted if we're unwilling to take a look at them and take responsibility. So when we can actually fall in love with our lives, past included, to be able to see it in a totally different light, and not just to understand, but to feel differently about it, then we start to fall in love with our own life story. Every single person in this room, your life is worth a novel or a feature film. And all of us, if you think about the films that have touched you the most, I guarantee that they're going to be things that are kind of a real life story in some way. And we glorify the actors who play these life stories out for us on the screen, but it is the story that is the magic. That's what gets us. And each and every one of us in this room has the same kind of magic available to you. Your story is also worth a novel. So we're going to do a little, this is an intellectual exercise, not an emotional one, but it will make the point. We're going to take a few moments for you to review your I gotta or your I wanna, the thing that you came up with off the top, and ask yourself, what do I imagine I would experience if I got that thing? Next question. If you do not achieve this thing, what would you make it mean? What fear must you face in yourself? And that fear is going to have a history for you. Third question, if you waved a magic wand and took away that fear about yourself entirely, poof, how would you feel even if nothing ever changed? Even if you didn't achieve the thing, how would you end up feeling? And this is just a little intellectual exercise to make the point that every single one of us already has what we need in our lives to feel totally 100% happy. So for example, if your I gotta is I gotta make more money, right? I gotta make more money. How do you imagine that you would feel if you did that? I would relax. I wouldn't worry. I would be able to just be free. If you did not achieve this thing, what would you make it mean? What fear must you face in yourself? I'm a failure, which is going to have a history. If the magic wand worked, poof, and I take that away entirely, the fear of failure is totally gone. You are not a failure. How would you feel? I would relax. I would feel free. I wouldn't worry about anything. So it's a little trick I'm playing on you. For you to see that number 1 is linked to number 3. So have a little chat to your neighbor about that. Take a couple of minutes to work your way through that with the thing you came up with off the top. Did that make the point? Yeah. We get so fooled into thinking that our well-being is dependent on these things outside of ourselves. We don't realize that it's an inside job. You change how you feel about yourself and you change your experience of your life. That's it. Last one is loving. People who say that love is the key to happiness are right, as long as they are not confused with being loved properly themselves with loving. Loving is something we do, it's a verb. And the same as fitness results from exercise and sweating, happiness results from actively practicing loving, being a loving human being. When we start changing our minds about who we are, we can turn around and stop looking for something or someone to be different outside of us so that we can feel okay. We can turn that around and start to become contributors and giving, as opposed to being on this mission to get things to make ourselves feel better. And ultimately, that's our task as adults, is to turn around from a place of worth, from a place of knowing our value, and actually contribute to those around us in some way. That, ultimately, I'm sure you all know this from experience, that feels good when you can see the impact that something you have done has had on another human being, or something you've said, or something you've given. And all of us have a choice here to make, to keep on striving to get more, better, different, to put all our energy and effort in that direction, or to say, nope, gonna give instead. Love isn't a thing that other people owe us just because we exist. Like, there's no debt sheet that says somebody has to do it a certain way for you. It's something that we do ourselves. And it's something we do authentically if we practice all those steps that I've been talking about here tonight, taking 100% responsibility for our own state instead of putting that on someone else. Because to the extent that you don't take responsibility for yourself, you will require other people to do it. Right? When you don't look inside of yourself, you will have rules in your relationship about what it's okay to talk about and what it's not okay to talk about how people have to be around you. What you refuse to take responsibility for, other people have to. So responsibility, taking, practicing being emotionally vulnerable and transparent instead of putting on all these crazy masks. Honestly, we're weird creatures. It's like we disguise ourselves and we hide, right? We hide, we pretend. It's like if I am a radio station and I just love jazz, but I am constantly broadcasting country and western all the time, and then I'm going, how come everybody I meet was wearing a cowboy hat? I just don't get it. How does that happen? I'm so frustrated because I love jazz. I just love it. The world organizes itself around who you are. And when you're presenting your defense, when you're presenting your mask, it will organize itself around that. If you are an overfunctioner, you will be surrounded by underfunctioners. Don't be surprised. Don't be surprised. People with their hands in their face right now. No! How could that be? When you are brave enough to let people know who you really are, life will organize itself around that too. It will. And you will be living a more authentic life. Happiness comes from ultimately allowing ourselves to be perfectly imperfect. So everything that all of us want is available in your real life right here, right now, no matter how challenging the circumstances might be. And what stops us ultimately from having that kind of wide open happiness is not something outside of ourselves, it's something inside of ourselves. It's the fears that we're holding about ourselves in the basement of our psyche. We can't ever live a full-out happy life when underneath it all, we're believing, I'm not lovable, I'm not good enough. That's the place we got to turn around and take a look at. And ultimately, the reward of doing that work is not just your own personal happiness. Like, in my opinion, we don't actually have the luxury of choosing whether or not it's a good thing to be loving and to be a more responsible human being. Because I believe that we have cultivated a whole society based on fear, and that we're actually doing a whole lot of damage globally in our families. Like, we have a responsibility to do this as well, to turn around and commit to living our lives based on honesty, authenticity, love, responsibility. So we're back to Michael Beckwith. What if absolutely nothing changed in your life? What would you have to shift from within in order to achieve a state of happiness? Honestly, if your life froze in this moment, and this is all there is, your life exactly as it is now, can you look at it and say, what a wonderful life? Too often we wait until the future is being taken away before we can turn around and look and say, what a wonderful life. Many years ago, my friend Diana died of cancer, of colon cancer, and she died when she was only 39, so she was pretty young. And toward the end of her life, she was young, she had a strong body, her heart kept beating even when she couldn't eat anymore. She was emaciated, she was weak, there was very little that she could do. And I asked her at that point whether the good in her life still outweighed the bad. And she said, absolutely it does. Like, I look forward to waking up in the morning and having my root beer ice chips. Root beer ice chips. I look forward to seeing the people that I love around me. And that, my hope and my prayer for all of us in this room is that we don't wait before our future is taken away in order to appreciate all that we have here. Honestly, if she can appreciate her life and her root beer ice chips, all of us can as well. And we also have a friend in Sweden right now, Bill, who's in hospice, dying of cancer, also fairly young, under 50, and the same thing. Like, he does a little daily diary of his life on Facebook. Can't eat anymore. But he also is full of appreciation and gratitude for the life that he has lived. And all of us have abundance. All of us have miracles. All of us have a wonderful, wonderful life. So what if everything is okay exactly as it is now? Can you connect to the beauty of that? I want to close with a little clip from a song that we just got back from a trip teaching all kinds of workshops in Ireland, and this is one that we used in a particular workshop that's coming up the edge, and it is an absolutely stunningly beautiful song. And it I'm closing because it kind of makes the point of what I've been talking about this whole evening.
You taught me the courage stars before you left. How light carries on endlessly, even after death, with shortness of breath. You explain the infinite, how rare and beautiful it is to even exist. But I couldn't help but ask you to say it all again. I tried to write it down, but I could never find a pen. I'd give anything to hear you say it one more time, that the universe was made just to be seen by my eye. And I couldn't help but ask you to say it all again. I tried to write it down, but I could never find a pen. I'd give anything to hear you say it one more time, that the universe was made just to be seen by my eyes. The shortness of breath, I'll explain the infinite, how rare and beautiful it truly is that we exist.
So that's for our friend Bill, that one. And thank you for your time.